With Aaron Rodgers out for Green Bay, can Brett Hundley turn the trick that Deshaun Watson has done so far in Houston? If you have Jameis Winston, should you start him? What about Leonard Fournette? We brought this scenario up on the show last week with Fournette, so if you were paying attention, hopefully you have Chris Ivory or set either way. We'll break down all 14 games with the latest key injury news, starting or sitting decisions, and much more as the OFN on PSN starts now. All right, welcome to a Sunday morning edition of OFN Fantasy as we go over the latest player news prior to kickoff today in the NFL. Introduce my co-hosts and fantasy experts to the show. First, Chief Fantasy Analyst at Ourlads.com, co-host of the Bill Roden on Sports podcast at iTunes, Jamal Murphy. So, Jamal, Amari Cooper finally came through.
Yeah, it's about time. I was very excited, doing cartwheels, all kinds of stuff. Unfortunately, I sat him in one of my leagues, but, at least I got his points in another one. So, good for Amari.
All right, excellent. Dan Weinrich also joining us, fantasy expert, sports producer. And Dan, how was your week?
Well, unfortunately, the league that Jamal did not sit Amari Cooper in, he's playing against me. So not an inauspicious start to the fantasy week indeed.
And that happens to be our league.
That's correct.
Okay, so you guys are playing this week.
Yeah, sorry about that, Dan.
It's all right. I got you. It's only fair considering I beat him last week by, I think, 0.3 points in another one of our leagues.
Yeah, the Frank Gore special right there. Frank Gore.
Why? What was that? What was Frank Gore?
Because, he gave you, the typical 9-10 points, had all these opportunities in the game to, scratch out a few more yards, get another catch, didn't do anything. I don't know if I'll ever start him again.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Well, let's talk about the big news that came up from last week, and that's Aaron Rodgers. So what about Jamal Brett Hundley? And it's very difficult to gauge his game against Minnesota, coming off the bench, on the road, big defense. But I think we'll definitely find out today. New Orleans does not have a great defense. They're an improved defense, but they're not a great defense, so there should be no excuse. I know there's some other injuries, of course, but hey, Aaron Rodgers had to deal with those injuries, and he's not a rookie. So I don't think there should be any excuse for Brett Hundley today. Nobody's asking him to go out and throw for 300 yards, but still an opportunity for him to show whether or not he has what it takes to be a quarterback, maybe a starting quarterback in this league, and of course whether he could be a starting quarterback on your fantasy roster. So he's definitely a pickup player on the bench, but you wouldn't start him, of course, right?
Not unless you had some serious issues, like you had your player on a bye week and it's hit between him and one of the horrible QBs out here in the league. It might be worth taking a chance. Just because he has all these weapons around him, now he has a week preparation. His coach McCarthy seems to have enough confidence in him. He said, mentioned a few times this week that he's been in the system 3 years. He expects a lot out of him. So we'll see. Physically, he's talented. I watched him a little bit when he was in relief of Aaron Rodgers. The numbers were horrible, but the presence back there was pretty good. He was making the throws, just didn't seem all put together in terms of, focus, maybe not knowing where everyone's supposed to be. Maybe, I attribute that to some kind of shock value because, I'm sure he had no idea he was coming in that game. And no matter what people say, you always got to be ready. You got Aaron Rodgers in front of you. You probably figure, you're chilling the whole year.
Well, Dan, who would you start between Brett Hundley, let's see, Tyrod Taylor, or Jameis Winston?
Well, I'm not sure. Do we know for sure if Jameis is playing?
No.
I think he's expected to play. I mean, assuming he plays, there's no hesitation there. I would start either Jameis or Tyrod Taylor over Hundley. I don't have very high expectations for Hundley. And I'd go a lot deeper than that. I mean, I'd start Josh McCown or Jay Cutler over him. I'd start CJ
Josh
Beathard over him.
McCown.
I'd start. So I'm not looking for much out of Hundley.
Wow.
But I am starting that Saints defense. So I guess that tells you everything you need to know.
All right. Well, we'll see. I mean, look, even if Hundley has a good game, you should. I mean, we would expect at least some opportunities for the defense. No question about that. I agree with that. I think the Saints, considering how they put up some big points over the last couple of games, wouldn't be stretched. They're kind of hot right now. And I think the other thing too, Jamal, is that, and you know, I know you go with the theory of your game plan is always to kind of every week or every couple of weeks pick up another defense. So I would assume then that you take a look at who's hot too. I mean, and look, the Saints are hot on defense, and you can't come up with big plays on defense unless you have a pretty good secondary, a pretty good back seven that can make some big plays, and that's what the Saints have been able to do this season with some of those young DBs.
Yeah, I mean that's a decent play. I think on Dan's part, I get the thinking. I do think he's Dan. To me, you're being a little
hard
on Hundley. Just I get it. We haven't seen him, but he's not. I don't think he's the worst quarterback in the world. McCown had a big game against New England, so I guess that's fair to go with a guy like McCown. Who's Cleveland's starting quarterback? That guy. I think whoever that is, I'll probably go with Hundley.
Yeah, that's Kaiser. No, but I would myself, to tell you the truth, I'd probably, I'd probably go with Hundley over McCown. I mean, I don't trust McCown. I mean, New England, we know how many problems they have back there in the secondary, and McCown ain't going to play like that again. And they get Powell back, so we'll find out how much he comes into play. It's a road game. Yeah, I don't trust McCown at all. But I guess, look, I mean, Dan, you're usually from what I've been able to catch so far this season, you're when it comes to young, unproven college kids turning pro, you're a wait and see approach guy.
Yeah, I'm a show me kind of guy. And just to get back to what Jamal says, I don't think that Hundley is the worst quarterback in the world. I just think he's the worst quarterback starting for an NFL team today.
Over so Kaiser? Would you take Kaiser over him?
I mean that's a coin flip. I mean is Kaiser back starting? They yanked Hogan.
Yeah.
I would in that case, if you're starting Hundley, I'm not going to criticize you. God forbid I'm ever had to make that choice, but so
okay.
I admit, Greg, you caught me there. There is one NFL quarterback I'd maybe start, but like I said, I'd start Beathard, I'd start McCown, I'd start Cutler. So I definitely haven't seen anything from Hundley to expect that he is going to be a great producer, so I have to see it first.
All right, and speaking of that Patriots secondary, and again, no Gilmore in the game, the big game coming up tonight against Atlanta. Dan, so with this matchup, it looks like everybody is healthy for the Patriots. Looks like Hogan's okay, Gronk's okay, running back seem okay. So it looks like with Gilmore out, we should have a pretty high-scoring game, which is great for fantasy owners. But again, I don't know about Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan would be a tricky kind of proposition to start, wouldn't he? It would all depend on who your backup is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm starting. I don't have Ryan in any league. Sorry, go ahead, Jamal.
Yeah, I mean, I have him, and I'm starting him. Only time who else could be your backup that you're going to go with, especially against the New England defense, who we saw, as we just talked about, McCown shred them. If Ryan doesn't, shred them, I'm already very down on him. Like I said, I think I have him in like 3 leagues or something ridiculous. I have the only one I'm sitting him is the league I have Dak Prescott as a backup.
That's our league.
Right. So I'm going to go Dak. Dak is pretty, Dak has a good matchup against San Francisco. And I'm going to be like Dan and, show me in that league as far as Matt Ryan. I haven't given up on him completely. I mean, it's only week 7. Let's keep in mind, much more than, a little more than half the season left to play. Guys can turn it around, especially proven guys. But, at this point, you get so frustrated with their lack of production, that it's just human nature to give somebody else a shot.
Okay, well, we'll see about whether or not Atlanta, this is, again, it seemed to be the perfect remedy for every quarterback going up against the Patriots when things aren't going well. So you would expect that if Matt Ryan and the Falcons are going to break out. But then again, it's not that some of his stats haven't been bad. It's just those late game turnovers. And of course, in leagues where you do get negative points on turnovers, maybe that comes into play just a tiny little bit. But yeah, I would think that most people would play Ryan in that matchup against the Patriot defense. Okay, let's look at the next game, which is also a pretty big game, and that is the Monday night game, Washington and Philadelphia. Washington's got a bunch of injuries to keep an eye on, especially on defense. So what do you think about how that's going to affect? Now, we've talked about Carson Wentz the last couple of weeks, Dan. Now, I'm definitely starting him moving forward. I have Matthew Stafford with Wentz, but with Stafford out, I'm just going to go with Wentz anyway for a few weeks and see how that goes until Stafford gets a little bit. He just hasn't been able to get going. I think Galladay's injury has really hurt the production that we thought that he'd have since the beginning of the season. But another game, Washington, Philadelphia, where we might see some points being scored. So with Carson Wentz, he's definitely producing, and I guess if you had to take one guy in that receiving core for the Eagles in the matchup tonight, who would you take?
Well, I know Aguilar has had the hot hand over the last few weeks, but I think with Norman out, I would put my bets on Alshon Jeffrey first to have the biggest game, but it's definitely very close between the two of them. It's almost like a Cooper Crabtree kind of situation where it's a little bit of a crapshoot towards who's going to outperform whom. But I would lean towards Alshon among the two. And definitely, Carson Wentz at this point, he's top 10 every week. He's top 5, I would say, this week. So you definitely feel good about running Carson Wentz out there.
Yeah, no. Didn't you have Alshon Jeffrey in a few leagues, or Jamal? Have you given up on him yet?
No, I haven't given up on him. I'm playing him. I think thank God I only have him in one league. And I'm going to play him.
Is that surprising? Aren't you surprised?
I like the Washington matchup. I think it's going to be a shootout. I think he'll get opportunities. I think he had 10 targets last week. So obviously he's still in the mix. He hasn't been as productive as I'd like, or as I think his draft position kind of demanded. But he's still got to be like a top 30 guy, a top 20 guy to the point where if you have him, most likely you're starting him.
All right, yeah, because I'm thinking that at some point, unless Jeffrey is just not the same player he was because of injuries, I'm thinking at some point in the next few weeks, maybe the next month, that he starts breaking out. He's just too talented. And you have Carson Wentz there who's having a productive season. Something's got to give. And maybe with the running game and Ertz and Aguilar, maybe opposing defenses won't pay so much attention to Jeffrey. So I don't know. Something's not right there. I'm willing to go with the fact that they haven't been able to get chemistry going yet, Dan, and maybe that's what we're also seeing in Washington. So if you had a choice of who to take with receiver, we thought in the beginning of the season that was an easy decision, go with Terrell Pryor. But that just hasn't been the case every week. Even Josh Doxson seems to be playing a little bit better here and there. Not the whole game, but it's wide open as far as who you can trust as far as the number one receiver for the Redskins, and let alone the number one running back.
Yeah, it's a perfect comparison because Alshon Jeffrey has been disappointing, but he hasn't been absent. He's still done a little bit of scoring in a couple good weeks. You're still counting on him. Whereas in Washington, Pryor and Jamison Crowder are essentially droppable at this point. I've seen them dropped across all kinds of leagues and not get picked up because they've both been atrocious.
Sure.
And let's remember, these are two guys. The beginning of last year, Pryor was primarily known as a college quarterback, and Crowder was a non-factor. And maybe the reason they had such great seasons last year is because Pryor was on the Browns. They had nobody else to throw to, and He was a perfect situation for him to sort of flex his athleticism. And Crowder, let's not forget, he had 2,000-yard wide receivers in front of him, taking up most of the attention, Garcon and Jackson. And, sometimes give a guy a chance to step up, and he's just not able. He doesn't have the skill. So I don't really know exactly why, but I'm not trusting. And I mean, Doxson and Ryan Grant, those are the stash guys. Those are the guys I think, well, they might pick it up. But I don't have any faith at all in starting any of them. The only guy on Washington I'd have any faith starting is Cousins and Chris Thompson, to be honest.
All right, next up is Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, and big opportunity for the Bengals, who left for dead after the way they looked the first few weeks, almost beating Green Bay in overtime, kind of woke their season up. A couple more wins, and of course they got Burfict back too, right around that time that they started to win. So they're still banged up a little bit, but offensively, Mixon now is starting to look like the number one running back we thought he would be when the season began. A.J. Green is back, and that always helps Andy Dalton tremendously. They still have some issues on the offensive line, which I think is hurting the overall production of the offense. And with the Pittsburgh defense, even though they're without Tuitt today, so keep that in mind. That Pittsburgh defense has really been the strength, Jamal, of the Pittsburgh team this season. So you get this matchup. I actually like the Bengals today. I think they're a pretty good upset play. I just don't – I need to see Pittsburgh as a complete team for a week or two, and they just haven't been complete yet. And this is, of course, a rivalry. I know the Steelers have dominated recently. Bengals coming off the bye. What about the matchups here? Because pretty much it's still for Pittsburgh. I mean, it's still Brown, it's still Bell, and that's pretty much it, right? I mean, I have Martavis Bryant, and the only reason why I would even consider playing him, one would be it's a home game, and the other would be the fact that I've got some potential injury issues at wide receiver.
Yeah, you're only playing Martavis in emergency situations now. He's disgruntled. He hasn't really been a part of the offense, so obviously try to stay away there. Mixon's interesting because we're still waiting he's obviously the best running back there. He's distinguished himself in that sense, but we're still waiting for like a breakout game.
Is he a starter? Is he a starter?
Yeah, I think he's a starter. He's high this year, 62 rushing yards. He had 51 last week. He's getting about 15 to 18 carries. Definitely, explosive guy. So sooner or later in these next couple coming weeks, he's going to have a breakout game, and it could be this week. So I think you gotta roll with him. I can't see you having that many more options, especially in deeper leagues.
All right, and anybody else on the Bengals, Dan, besides A.J. Green? I know we talked about Croft being disappointing after the first big game. So do you even have Croft on your team as a backup, and you're hoping that he has another good week, and then maybe you start him again?
I mean, I don't think Croft is worth holding on a roster spot. He's pretty available across leagues, and he's a dart throw, just like a lot of these tight ends. I don't, it's nice that he's not, we don't have to wait on a weekly basis to see if Eifert's going to play. So at least, it's his job for now. But he hasn't, he had one great game and that was it. He's come along a little bit. If you're really desperate, because there definitely have been a bunch of tight end injuries, then, it's not the worst streamer start, but that's where I would qualify, or that's why I would categorize Croft as a streamer candidate, not somebody you need to own.
And by the way, keep an eye on John Ross. At some point, he's going to return. It could be any game now. This is the kid that flew up the draft charts because of his 4.22 40 at the combine. Record-breaking 40. He's got legit speed, obviously, and he's also a return guy. So not somebody that you go with at this point, but one of these players that just keep an eye on him. And if you see he's playing finally, and maybe you watch the game, and maybe you see Dalton just misses him, a couple of times, especially deep, and maybe you're seeing him returning some kicks. Not the worst idea in the world to bring him in as a backup, because there's always players like that, Jamal, that sometimes if you have a spot on the bench and you're really not looking for necessarily a starter, but you're looking for somebody where you're just trying. It's just a wild card. You're just going, okay, you know what? I have the space. I can go ahead and take a chance on a guy and hope that he has a good week, and then I get him early.
Yeah, but as you go through the season, those spots become more precious, and you do have to kind of wait and see. Unless you're, it's got to be a proven guy, like an injury, who has an injury, is supposed to come back, maybe a David Johnson type. You stash him, maybe a Luck type before the most recent news that he's probably out for the season. Guys like that, but you can't, you don't really have enough spots on your roster to hope and pray for a guy who hasn't done anything yet. So I think you stay away from him, and just hope, you have a chance on the waiver wire if he does actually do something.
All right, Arizona and the Rams. This one is over in England. And so maybe that benefits Arizona. Who knows? Maybe not, because the Rams haven't exactly looked great at home this season. So it is their home game, but it is over in England. And Arizona now is a completely different team, Dan, with Adrian Peterson. And, of course, we talked about John Brown being healthy. So I guess the question is, what do you do about Carson Palmer?
Well, if you need, it depends on your situation, right? But Carson Palmer definitely has been okay. And if you need to march him out there, you feel all right. I would qualify him as about, in that sort of 10 to 15 range of QBs with guys like Alex Smith, Big Ben, Tyrod Taylor. He's not quite as good of a start if you have somebody like Cam or Kirk Cousins or Marcus Mariota. But he's certainly, I trust him a lot better than some of the more fringe guys, like Bortles or McCown or Dalton or certainly Hundley.
All right. And this other game next is New Orleans and Green Bay. And we talked about Hundley, Jamal. So I guess regarding his weapons, what do you do with his weapons? I have Aaron Jones in my other league, and I'm going to go ahead and start him again because just like we're wondering about whether Hundley, what kind of a game he's going to have and against that New Orleans defense, we know they're going to try to run the ball a little bit. I have a couple other running backs that I could go with, like a Deion Lewis or maybe even Matt Forte, but I'm going to go with Aaron Jones. I think that I still, how I feel about him, and I think that with the Saint defense, the only thing I'm worried about is Ty Montgomery, and hoping, of course, that McCarthy doesn't screw that up.
Yeah, well, you should be worried about Montgomery, and McCarthy will probably screw that up. From your perspective, especially. But I still think Aaron Jones is a start. Unless you have some serious options besides him. And I think Montgomery is probably a start if you're in a bind or, it's a close call between, him and you're talking about like a Darkwa or someone like that. Montgomery's a decent start. I think they're both going to get touches. I think they both get more touches probably, this week because of Hundley and Montgomery. We know he's really a wide receiver turned running back. You got to think he's going to see more action. Short passes from Hundley, try to simplify the offense. So I'm sure he's going to be involved. The wide receiver position is tricky for me for Hundley because, I'm acting like I'm confident in him, but I still, on the other side, I do agree with Dan. You got to be scared of what might happen when he tries to put the ball in the air. So that jeopardizes Jordy Nelson. Obviously, Cobb, I think, is a sit unless you're desperate, because his production was declining even with Aaron Rodgers in the game. So with Cobb, you kind of have to let one of those wideouts go. I guess Devontae Adams, you might want to play just to see what happens. But definitely, I think the wide receivers take a hit. The running backs, I think, should still be in pretty good shape.
All right. And what about the Saints, Dan? Michael Thomas is the only guy that you're going to start in that receiving core right now, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, because I am holding on Willie Snead in a couple of leagues, and I've heard a lot of good buzz about Willie Snead this week from other analysts, feeling confident about what he can do this week against the Green Bay secondary. That they're very
weak.
They're very vulnerable to slot receivers like Snead, but I don't really trust him yet. He only played like a third of the snaps last week. He was sidelined a lot of this week's practice, so I'm sort of holding on Snead. I need to see something, and Ginn, Coleman, those guys are a little bit too inconsistent right now. But I sure love those Saints running backs, boy.
Yeah, now with Peterson out of the way, that is they're both must starts every week moving forward, and that makes life a lot easier when you're trying to put these lineups together, and it makes things a lot easier for all three running backs with Adrian Peterson in Arizona now. What about Minnesota and Baltimore? Dan, Minnesota, Baltimore, and look, this Bradford thing, and now we're waiting for Bridgewater, but Keenum is starting. Diggs is out, so that's a big out. But Baltimore also has got a couple of receiver issues with Macklin and Wallace. I don't know. I mean, this is one of those games where really, if you're starting anybody the entire, in this game period, who are you starting? You're starting McKinnon and Taylor, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, you feel well. Look, you feel good. You feel good about McKinnon and Adam Thielen, but if you might have to start Case Keenum. I would start Case Keenum over Hundley. He's been okay, but that's for pretty much McKinnon and Thielen are all you feel good about. Certainly not Latavius Murray or any other receivers. Probably not Kyle Rudolph, who's been very disappointing. So that Minnesota's offense is definitely. And the thing about Teddy coming back, I don't know if anybody remembers. Though he was a solid game manager, he never put up big numbers.
No, we'd have no idea what to expect from Teddy Bridgewater, even if he does come back.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Diggs is a huge loss for that offense. And look, Baltimore is an opportunistic defense. Defense is not the problem. Look, the run defense has been, which is why McKinnon's a good play, period, because Brandon Williams is out, and Chicago took advantage of that last week. No reason to think that Minnesota won't be trying to run the ball again this week. But look, we don't know what we get out of Baltimore every week, and we don't know what we get out of Case Keenum every week. So this is one of those games where just try to stay with what kind of works, and that's what worked recently or all season with Thielen and of course McKinnon for the Vikings.
And I'm also I like everybody else. I'm anxiously waiting to see which of these Baltimore receivers are going to be playing this week, because I have Macklin and Wallace in a few places. And, right now, if neither of those guys play, it might be finally the week where Alex Collins has the opportunity to break out, because you figure if Joe Flacco doesn't have either of his weapons in the receiving core, that Harbaugh is going to decide to really lean on the run. But I am hoping that at least one of those guys will play. And if one of them plays and the other doesn't, then they're probably a decent play, because Minnesota, they are very stingy against the run. And although they have Xavier Rhodes, I don't know if he'll be matched up with either of those guys all day long. So
I think you have to be really kind of desperate to play either Macklin or Wallace, because of the fact that even if they play, that means they're not 100%. And they're going up against a very good Minnesota defense. So that would be tricky. And by the way, too, I would have to think that if it's really a close call, they might just sit these guys because they got the short week. They've got the Dolphins Thursday. And that is a more important game. If they're going to pick one of the two games to win, it's the Miami game, because it's in the conference. It could be a wild card situation. So just keep an eye on that.
Just to button that one point, if I had to guess, Greg, I would guess that they'll sit Macklin, because Macklin seems like he's a little bit more frail. Wallace has always been a gamer. I think he's only missed like one game in his whole career.
Okay.
So my guess, if I had to guess, I would guess Wallace plays and Macklin sits, but we'll have to wait and see.
And I actually think both defenses might not be bad plays, to tell you the truth. I know Minnesota would be. I just wouldn't even think that Baltimore wouldn't be a bad call either.
No, they're both great starts. If you have either of those defenses, you should be in okay shape. They're certainly both top 10 plays this week. It should not be a very high scoring affair.
All right, Jets in Miami. Speaking of the Dolphins, Jamal. So Powell looks like he's back. We have no idea how that's going to impact the running situation. So, but I don't know. I mean, all right, maybe if you have to start him, you do. But if you've got other guys, it would probably make more sense to not start either Powell or Forte.
Yeah, I think that they're both sits because you just don't know what's going on with the Jets backfield. You have no clue who's going to get more carries out of those two guys. McGuire's still in the mix. He hasn't really done anything the last couple of weeks, but he's in the mix. He gets touches, so it completely muddles everything up. You got to stay away from the Jets running backfield for sure.
But but Severian Jenkins, he's definitely right now he's one of the better tight end starters after. A slow start. He's come on big time, and that's not a surprise. McCown loves throwing to his tight ends.
Right, and limited quarterbacks usually love the tight end. And unfortunately, I didn't think about that earlier, or else I would have Severian Jenkins, who had a huge game against New England, and should have had a bigger game if it wasn't for the worst call I've ever seen in my life. I think he's obviously a solid play moving forward. McCown has, serious confidence in him. I don't expect his production to dip any. Definitely got to feel confident there.
And Ajayi, who got shut down the first game against the Jets, played probably had his best game last week, so that's a good sign for them. Pouncey, no word on whether he's going to play. I don't know if he's a game-time decision or not. That could be a big impact for the Dolphins, but there's no other players besides Ajayi that you would start. Would you, Dan? Nobody except Ajayi.
No, I definitely start Jarvis Landry.
You would? Okay.
Yeah, I think Landry is a reliable, especially in a PPR. Okay. But that's it. Although I do have to say once again, I would start Jay Cutler over Hundley.
All right. Okay.
I would never start Jay Cutler.
All right. Well, look, here's a couple quarterbacks that you have to seriously think about starting too. Buffalo, Tampa Bay, Winston, and Taylor. We'll find out. I think Winston's going to start. And if he does start, the question, though, is does he continue to play the whole game? Buffalo's defense is their strength. We don't know what we're getting out of Winston from week to week this season. But with Tampa Bay, it's just the usual suspects, especially now that Martin's back. So it's Winston. That's your decision, whether you want to start him or not. But, yeah, Evans and, of course, Martin now. What about Deshaun Jackson? Do you start Deshaun Jackson, Jamal?
Only if you're in a bind, as far as I'm concerned. Too inconsistent and really been like that for the past 3 years, probably. That you have to be in a serious bind and have few options.
And look, the Bills' receiving situation: Clay out, Matthews probably not going to play. Matthews wouldn't be a bad pickup, Dan. If you're looking for a receiver, because he's close to coming back. And when he does come back, especially if Clay's out, he's going to be the guy, you would think, until Zay Jones gets some sort of chemistry going, and maybe the bye week will help the chemistry with Taylor, with Zay Jones.
Yeah. If you're look, I drafted Jordan Matthews late round in a few leagues. I thought it was a great value, and if you are really desperate. If your wide receiver core has either been decimated or extremely disappointing, if you have some of those Redskin guys or just some players who have underperformed, and you really need to find someone off the waiver wire, Jordan Matthews is definitely, you could do worse as far as a lottery ticket. But temper your expectations. He wasn't exactly lighting the world on fire for the first couple games before he got hurt. And, he's still only played, I think, in like 2 games with Tyrod Taylor because he missed most of the preseason. He was injured. Mm-hmm. So, it might take time to build chemistry. And so, like I said, I would just temper your expectations. But certainly, yes, Greg, it's definitely a good guy to grab if you're scouring the waiver wires for a wide receiver each week like I do in some of my leagues.
And this could be a really good game for McCoy. You would think that, I mean, they haven't. Now, look, Glenn being out most of the season has really hurt the Bills' rushing attack. But it's now time for the Bills against this Buck defense, which is banged up, especially with David and Alexander. Once again, not sure if they're going to play this week, so keep an eye on that. But McCoy's a start every week anyway. It's just that, maybe like Amari Cooper, Jamal, maybe this is finally the week he breaks out. Jamal. Dan.
Yeah, Buffalo. I think. I think you got to stay away from offensively. If you have McCoy, you're going to play him, and just hope. And like you said, it is like a Amari Cooper situation. You just got to hope that he does something.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely don't put him on the bench, and if you have, then you take him off this week. That's for sure. Chargers and Broncos and Melvin Gordon. Jamal is banged up a little bit. I have to go with Phillip Rivers now that Aaron Rodgers is out. So not a good week for me to start Phillip Rivers, but it is what it is. Also, Keenan Allen is dealing with a little bit of an injury situation, so I have to deal with that. So those are the two things to keep an eye on in this game. Is Gordon and Allen a little bit banged up?
Yeah, and then going against Denver, the Denver defense, who looked pretty bad against the Giants. So, I guess you can move the ball on them and you can run on them. But still, the hard-hitting defense, you got to wonder about those two guys who come in less than 100%. But you have no choice but to play Gordon for sure. So I mean, with that game on the Denver side, they've been struggling offensively. I don't know if I start Simeon over Huntley, to tell you the truth. Dan, what do you think?
I wouldn't, especially with Sanders out. I mean, that's I don't know where he's going to throw the ball now. And the Chargers, if they're smart, they've got one really good corner. You put that guy on Thomas, and that's it. And then you would think Denver's going to want to run the ball, right, Dan?
Yeah, I mean that. I would start Simeon over Huntley. At least he's had a little bit of production. You've got Benny Fowler, who had a big week one. A couple touchdowns. He's going to be stepping in for Sanders. Is he Sanders? No. But I do think that they'll manage to move the ball some. But yes, they will likely lean on the running game. So who knows? Maybe this will be the fluky week where Jamal Charles scores a touchdown. But definitely C.J. Anderson should have a big week.
Yeah, I mean, as far as by the way, we'll probably get even to see some of the depth at receiver for Denver. Is there anybody there? I mean, I like Jordan Taylor. I wish he would get more of an opportunity to start, but look, they got two really good weapons. But I think Jordan Taylor, maybe he gets some more reps and maybe he'll be able to produce a little bit. But again, they're not a passing team. But yeah, you know what? Maybe as Anderson has played well, you do wonder what would happen if Charles was the number one running back, because Jamal Charles is one of those guys that needs to get 20, 25 touches because sooner or later he usually breaks them open. But it is what it is, and we'll see. Big matchup in that one. And again, some key injuries to keep an eye on for both teams. All right, next up, let's go into Jacksonville and Indianapolis. And with Jacksonville, look, their defense is a good start, but the big story is definitely Fournette, Dan. Fournette, and as we said last week, if you have Fournette, you might want to think about picking up Chris Ivory because he was even banged up last week. Now it's looking like there's a possibility Fournette doesn't play.
Yeah, I mean, if you have Ivory, or if you have a spot that you can spare and he's still available, grab him. But Fournette sounded confident that he would play. He is a not normal human. So don't get too excited, and definitely check before you put Ivory in your lineup. But that's definitely one of the biggest, I would say, injury stories to keep your eye on before kickoff today.
Yeah, Jamal, that's pretty much. I mean, the good news is that it's a 1:00 game. So especially if you did have Fournette, if you do have Fournette and you did pick up Ivory, which you should have last week as a good backup for Fournette, this is that perfect situation. Is you wait till game time, and who starts? I mean, if you know Fournette starts, you start him, and if he doesn't, you start Ivory, right?
Yeah, no question. I think, if you have Ivory, in that situation, you're fine because even if Fournette is out, Ivory, proven guy, he's actually looked really good this year in all his opportunities. Even with Fournette out there, he was getting opportunities in the passing game. So it's even a situation where if you're in a real bind, you could play them both because they both might produce. But yeah, I mean Fournette's a beast, like Dan said. If he plays at all, you gotta go with him. He probably does play. So yeah, I mean the Jacksonville backfield pretty set as far as that goes.
All right, and next game, Carolina, Chicago. Luke Kuechly not going to play, so that could be a big boost for Chicago's running game. Howard had another nice game last week against Baltimore, and that had a lot to do, as we mentioned, about Baltimore having their own injury situation with Brandon Williams, so they get a break now with Kuechly out. So Howard is definitely probably the lone must start right now for the Bears. As far as Carolina, they've got the Kelvin Benjamin situation, Jamal. So, and that's another situation I have to keep my eye on. Not sure if he's going to play or not.
Yeah, the reports right now this morning that he's going to play. He's been banged up, had injuries all year long, and played through them for the most part. So he'll be out there. So definitely have confidence with him. He also got Funchess, who's looked good for the past few weeks. So I think both of those guys are probably plays.
Yeah, the thing with Benjamin, of course, we've talked about this, Dan, is that he just seems like he's always injured. Not just this year. It's like his entire career has been an injury. Not that he's always out, but he's always banged up. And you're a little afraid sometimes. You play him. He's out there for one catch. He gets hit, and he's out for the game. But, hey, you got to risk it.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's just the nature of fantasy football for some players. They're great when they're out there, but you can't always count on them even staying through a game. And then then there are some guys that look. One way to look at it is at least if they're playing. Like John Brown, for example, he plays, he produces. You don't know if they'll play every week, but he plays, he produces, as opposed to say somebody like a Sammy Watkins, who seems to be healthy this year and is just not able to get the chemistry going with Jared Goff, and you don't really know how to explain that. Same with like a Martavis Bryant, or the Washington wide receivers. So, pick your poison there. But as long as he's healthy, you definitely have to run him out there.
Yeah, and this is what you do at the beginning of the season when you're drafting players, is that you have to keep, you're always, okay, you know what, I'm not putting Benjamin talent-wise in the same group. He's going to move down a little bit, even though he's as talented as A and B player, but he's always banged up. And that's why, you take the other guys who aren't banged up when, he's in the same talent class, because that's the thing that you have to deal with during the season. And until he's completely healthy for a year or two, that's the way you got to deal with Kelvin Benjamin moving forward. Seattle and Chicago, Jamal, and this game in New York after the Giants' big win over Denver. But the running game now looks like it's a lot better, that Darkwa and Gallman have opportunities to play. Ingram had a nice week last week, so he's definitely a start if you're in a tight end league. Shepard looks like he may be back as well. So what do you do with Shepard, Gallman, and Darkwa?
Well, starting with the running backs, I think you got to go Darkwa. He's taken the reins as the number one guy there. He's been running hard all year. He had injury problems also, but seems healthy now. He had over 120 yards rushing, or 117 yards rushing, I think, last week against Denver, of all teams. So yeah, he's the guy for the Giants that you got to go with, no question. He's not really a big threat out of the backfield. So PPR wise, he hurt you a little bit. I think Gallman is the guy PPR wise, but he probably is going to get less touches, even though he will be a part of the offense. The Giants kind of changed their offense up last week. They're making a concerted effort to run the ball more. So you got to figure that they will be committed to the run. Those guys will get opportunities. As far as the wide receivers and Shepard, I think he's a good play. The word is that he is going to play today. He has that bum ankle, so that you got to worry about that, whether he takes the hit.
Dan, you're right, Dan. You're outside in the winter or something.
Whether he's the type of guy
to talk about. I'm just sitting here on my couch.
All right.
whether he's the type of guy to get
looking at porn?
Injured and be out for the rest of the game. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with Shepard.
All right. I didn't hear anything you said, Jamal. So I was too distracted by the heavy breathing of Dan over here, watching porn in his living room. All right. So anyway, what do you do with Procise, Dan? And
I don't trust.
And Rawls.
I'm not touching any of the Seattle running backs.
Yeah, stay away.
And Baldwin the only guy besides Wilson? Or do you go with Graham too?
No, Graham is a must start. I mean, I'd be surprised you're in a situation where you have a better tight end option than Jimmy Graham. So run him out there as long as he's healthy. He's a decent chance to be at least a red zone threat, if not get 5 to 8 catches.
All right, and Dallas and San Francisco. So you're going with Prescott, Jamal. Elliott is going to play. Okay, yeah, that's already gotten sickening. That was sickening a month ago. But with San Francisco, Beathard gets a start. But that's not even a quarterback to even think about picking up at this point in time for your bench. What about the players Bryant? You talked about Bryant. You happy with Bryant? No, right? You can't be happy with Bryant right now, Jamal.
Yeah, he hasn't been horrible. He does catch touchdowns every now and then. He has at least 3, maybe 4 touchdowns, and then and Prescott does target him a lot. He just hasn't been the player that he was supposed to be. And you're talking about expectations way back from college. He was supposed to be a beast. He probably had a year or two of that kind of production, and besides that, he's just a good wide receiver, and he's valuable, even more so valuable because they don't have anybody else. Dallas, you look at the rest of their receiving core, there's nobody that you would even think about starting really in fantasy. So Bryant's the guy. Maybe Witten will get some looks from Prescott as well. But even though Bryant is he's not one of the top 5 receivers in the league, he's definitely a guy you got to put in your lineup.
And you don't touch anybody on San Francisco, right, Dan?
Can we just go back for a second? Because, did you just say that Dez Bryant is a good wide receiver? That's it? He's just a good wide receiver?
That's it. Look at the numbers.
You're out of your mind, man. Dez Bryant's a Hall of Famer.
Hall of Famer?
Show me the numbers, Dan. Talk numbers.
He's got more touchdowns than any other wide receiver over the past 10 seasons.
How many?
100. I don't know. I don't have the numbers in front of me because I wasn't expecting you to make such a crazy,
I know. I can tell
statement.
you don't have the numbers in front of you.
And I don't know what you're talking about. Dez Bryant is probably the number 4 or 5 wide receiver to start.
How many yards did he have last year?
Are we talking fantasy or are we talking real?
Now we're talking fantasy.
Last year his numbers weren't good at all.
He was dealing with injury. He had a broken knee last year.
Even before he went out. Even this year, his numbers aren't great.
I don't know what game you watched.
I think
that Dez Bryant is only a good wide receiver. Jermaine Kearse is a good wide receiver. Dez Bryant is elite.
I don't know, Dan. You might have a man crush on him.
Well, I think Dez Bryant.
You have a man crush on Cole Beasley, and you're just mad he's not getting the work. I know you like those long blonde flowing hair.
Look, Dez Bryant's elite, but there's definitely not, for whatever reason, him and Prescott. That's just not. They haven't developed into some sort of elite combination yet, and I don't know if they ever will. That's just not. Prescott is not a downfield passer. So
I don't see the eliteness.
If there was a quarterback that was a star quarterback that liked to throw to his receivers down the field, I think Bryant would probably be right next to probably be number 2 or number 3 next to Jones and Brown. But
I don't see that.
Well, with Prescott, I don't think that's ever going to happen. So, but anyway. But he does have to stay healthy, and he has to deal with Ezekiel Elliott. So, and we'll see if we can put up big numbers today against the Niners. And then finally, Cleveland and Tennessee. Delaney Walker's banged up, so keep that in mind. DeMarco Murray's also banged up a little bit, Dan. So another one of these situations where you have to keep an eye on the potential Henry Murray thing by game time?
Yeah, I mean, this has been really frustrating all season because, and not just this year, last year too. It seems like every time Derrick Henry has a breakout game, you think that okay, this is they're going to turn it over or at least make him the main back, and then it seems like every time that happens, the next game he gets like 7 or 8 carries. So certainly, I feel better about Henry with DeMarco. A little banged up. I'd feel a lot better about him if I knew DeMarco wasn't playing. Until I know DeMarco isn't playing, Henry is a somewhat dicey start.
All right, and then that's the only. I mean, and you start anyone else? I mean, because you don't touch anybody on Cleveland again except Duke Johnson, and with Tennessee right now, it's just Rashard Matthews. He starts Jamal every week, or no, or it all depends.
I tell you what, Greg, I'm actually starting Eric Decker in one of my leagues this week. He had a pretty he had something like 15 points last week, his best game of the season. He was hurt a lot of preseason, and so there wasn't a lot of time for him and Mariota to develop a chemistry. But we all know that Decker has been a very solid red zone threat over the last 6-7 seasons, and I think he could have a big game in Cleveland.
All right. Do you have any start-sit dilemmas this week, Jamal?
I had Rashard. Speaking of Rashard Matthews, I had to decide between him and Alshon Jeffrey. And as I mentioned, I went with Jeffrey, but I did think it was a close call. The Mariota injury, he looked okay last week. Hopefully he can stand. He can keep up straight this week. I do think Rashard Matthews is a solid start. I went with Alshon Jeffrey, in that matchup, just basically because of the matchup with Washington, and I thought there'd be points scored.
All right. And by the way, Dan, if either Allen or Benjamin doesn't play, then would you start Martavis Bryant or Paul Richardson? I mean, I would go with. I'm leaning towards going with Bryant, being at home and all that kind of stuff over Richardson. But then again, Richardson kind of is more of okay. Maybe you'll get your 10 points and be happy with it.
I mean, you obviously have more upside with Bryant, and I think that Richardson has been consistent, but Richardson's consistent output is just a hair above what Bryant's floor is.
Yeah,
I would say. So I would definitely go with Bryant.
Yeah. The only thing because you also don't want to miss Bryant having a big game. You have any dilemmas this week, Dan?
Yeah, well, actually, it's a couple guys we were talking about because in one of my the 10-team league that's non-PPR, I have Chris Ivory, and the question is now that we know that there's a good chance that Fournette might not play, do I put him in front of LeGarrette Blount or Aaron Jones or Derrick Henry?
Jamal?
I don't have an opinion on that one. Sorry.
Give me that again, then, Dan.
So it's Chris Ivory, LeGarrette Blount, Aaron Jones, or Derrick Henry in the non-PPR. So looking for the guys most likely to score touchdowns, really.
Blount.
Even with Smallwood back.
Yeah, because you just said touchdowns too.
That's the most important thing in a non PPR. But still, if a guy gets 100 yards, it's better than a guy getting 20 yards in a touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Henry thing is just all about the injury. I mean, if of course, it's easy for both Ivory and Henry, because if Fournette or Murray don't play, then there you go. Then you're all set. Matter of fact, if both don't play, then you still go with Henry, I would guess, right? If both don't play over Ivory. What would you do, Jamal?
I think you got to go Henry. Last week it's a flip-flop situation. Last week I was saying Murray. Now I'm saying Henry. Henry had the better game, I think, last week. So but it's a bad situation to have either one of those guys, to tell you the truth.
All right, so we will be back and talking about. We're almost at the midway point next week, and we'll of course update everything that goes on today on tomorrow's OFN show at 6 o'clock, Jamal. So looking forward to talking to you tomorrow, and Dan, we'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, Greg.
All right, you got it. Thanks for Jamal Murphy and Dan Weinrich for joining us here on the show. And again, we want to remind everybody to check back in tomorrow at 6 o'clock as we wrap up the weekend of pro and college football here on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. You can listen to our on-demand shows on our YouTube or iTunes pages on the Prime Sports Network. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN and check out the best NFL and college football depth charts in the business at Ourlads.com. For Dan Weinrich, for Jamal Murphy, and Greg DePalma, we'll see you next time on Ourlads Football Network Fantasy.